So what games were big in 1981? Let's find out.
Since Spacies.
G'day invaders, Brian here from Since Spacies, and the reason why I'm recording from this really cold beach today is this is the area that I grew up in 1981. This is Sydney's Cronulla Beach. The longest beach in Sydney. If you have a look around, it's quite a long, significant beach here in Sydney. And the reason why I'm recording here, like I said, is because this is the area that I grew up in. And there was a lot of video game parlors, I should say, in this area. Now, a lot of those amusement centres, as they were called, were taken up by snooker tables, but the snooker tables in 1981 were slowly disappearing and being replaced by dedicated arcade machines. Formerly centres were dedicated to the snooker tables, and they were being ousted by these new fandangled electronic machines. Now, 1981 actually was not a very busy year for video games. There was a couple of significant releases that I will talk about in a moment, but for the most part, a pretty quiet year. What were the big significant events of that year? Let's have a look.
In 1981, Konami releases Frogger. Now this game has spanned over 20 sequels and spin-off games. And a real weird did you know fact that I found when researching this game, that in 2008 the city of Melbourne here in Australia created a spin-off game called Grogger. And that was to teach people how to safely get home at the end of the night after a night out on the soup. Yeah, only in Australia. Also in late 1981, Williams releases Stargate, and this is a sequel to Defender, which was also released in 1981 as well. That's pretty insane when you think about it. Two games in a series released in the same year as each other. It's totally unheard of in 2018. In 1981, Sega releases a game called Turbo, which was a pioneering 3D racer game which had graphics that really blew the arcade away at the time. SNK releases a game called Fantasy, which is the very first game to be credited with a continue feature in the arcades. Utopia was released for the Intellivision, and it was one of the first city building games that would eventually lead to games similar to SimCity being released. IBM pack in a game called Donkey.bas, and it becomes the first PC compatible game that was also co-written by Bill Gates, that had you driving a car avoiding road donkeys. Seriously, Bill, this is not your best moment. Also in 1981, the VIC-20 computer is released by Commodore. And last of all, Sega start test marketing the SG-1000, which would eventually become Sega's very first home console, which was to be released in 1983.
So my first nomination of Video Game of the Year for 1981 goes to Defender, and this was a game that was released by Williams. It was their very first game that they ever made, video game that is, and it was released as a direct response to the threat that video games were giving to pinball machines at the time. So that was a really cool response to the threat that was being thrown at them by these new fandangled machines that were sprouting up everywhere and imposing on their business. So for me, one of the best aspects of this game was the fact that you could move left and right. It was a wraparound sort of field. You had your map at the top there telling you where everything was, which was pretty cool for the time because there was not a lot of details in games at that time. So having a little map at the top there really did give you an idea of what your target was meant to be. And the whole concept of the game is to rescue the humans before they would get abducted by the aliens, and yeah, you had to catch them before they fall to the ground. One thing as a kid when I was playing it, I didn't realize that the ground didn't affect you. So if you hit the ground or the land, you didn't get destroyed. That was something that I didn't realize playing it as a kid. Would have helped a lot actually if I knew that earlier. So this game has a lot of borrowed aspects from Asteroids. It has the hyperspace feature, which is something that Asteroids had. It also has that wraparound feature, which is also something that Asteroids had. But this game brings enough personality and ideas of its own, I think, to be forgiven for the fact that it is kind of borrowing heavily from Asteroids at the time. One thing that I forgot to mention is if you fail to rescue the humans, they become like a beefed up alien ship, and they become harder to destroy. So rescuing those humans before they got abducted was very, very crucial to your own safety, never mind trying to rescue the humans as well. So this game was ported onto many different consoles, including the Atari 2600, which was the version that I got to play the most. It also got ported over to PlayStation 3 in a compilation series, and you'll be able to easily find it in different compilation packs since. And they did try to make a spin-off sequel. This was a sequel, I think it was on the PlayStation 3 from memory, and it was in first-person view. But for me, it all comes back to the original. This is the one that you really want to be playing. I like what they were trying to do with the game and tried to give it some life. But I just think that everyone will remember Defender for this original title. My next nomination of Game of the Year for 1981, it goes to Galaga, or Gallagher as you guys seem to want to pronounce it overseas. Most Aussies that I've bumped into pronounce it as Galaga, and that's how I'm going to keep pronouncing it myself. But this was a direct sequel to a game called Galaxian, which was a really cool shooter that kind of took the theme from Space Invaders and added to it. And this is another game that kind of adds to it even more. You can see that you got more complex patterns when it comes to the actual spaceships flying in the background. And also you've got your ship being captured in this one. So you got, here we go, track the beam. They're trying to capture your ship. And if they do succeed in capturing it, you can get it back by shooting that ship that captured your ship, if that makes sense. This is just one of those games that I fell in love with the first moment that I got my eyes on it. And I spent so much money on playing this in the arcade back in the day, and it's still such an addictive, such a playable game in 2018. I still actually when I got the NES Mini, the first thing I fired up on that was the NES version of Galaga. It was really cool actually to play it on a different system for the first time. And this was actually released on the Sega SC3000 as well, and that's a pretty solid port as well. One of the cool things about Galaga is that you had every third level, you had like a bonus stage, and this would have the enemies coming down in waves but not shooting at you, and you just had to try to do your best to shoot them all to get that 100% and get as many bonus points as possible. And you can see I love it so much, I've even got the shirt for the Dual Fighters. I actually just picked this up yesterday for this video, so that was a really cool pickup. So for my final Game of the Year nomination for 1981, it has to go to Donkey Kong, which is such an iconic game, and so many cool things came of this title, especially cool for Nintendo. If it wasn't for this game, I don't think people would have heard of Nintendo, and it wouldn't be the household name that it is today. So I'll try and run through all the cool bits of trivia about this game with you. First off, you've got, of course, the introduction of Mario, and the most worst kept secret on YouTube is that his name was originally Jumpman, or Mr. Video. Also, it's the introduction, of course, of Donkey Kong himself, and the girl that you see in there is, of course, not Princess Peach. That is Pauline, and she made a reappearance after all these years in the last Mario, which was Mario Odyssey, and that was a pretty cool title on the Switch. But this is where it all began. So one of the cool things about this game is that it's a story. It's one of the first games to be telling a story. You're this, not a plumber, he was a carpenter in this game, and you're trying to save this damsel in distress. Yeah, that's the only role she's got up there, is sitting up there at the top of the building yelling out help, help over and over again, which is, yeah, a little disappointing and sad, but that was the era that this game was made. Also, this is the very first game that was directed by Shigeru Miyamoto, along with Gunpei Yokoi, who's very famous for the Game & Watch series. So the two of them got together and they were trying deliberately to make a game that would appeal to Westerners. And I think they really succeeded in spades with this game. It's one of the first games to have multiple stages. So you got 4 stages all up. The most iconic one is the barrels and the ramps. And then you've got, I think this was the third level, which is probably the hardest level actually, and least interesting for me. But then you got the last final level here, which is with all the girders. This is probably one level that I find the most interesting out of the lot. But it gave you a goal. It led to so many sequels and spin-offs that this one game was probably the founding reason why Nintendo is just so famous today. This game has also been responsible for so many cultural references, it's just too many to name, but probably the most famous of them all was the King of Kong documentary featuring Billy Mitchell and his ruthless attempts at holding on to his record as King of Kong. So King of Kong is a documentary that you should see, and if you haven't already seen it, I urge you strongly to get out there and watch it in any way possible that you can. Billy Mitchell is the villain that we all needed in the video game industry. So many people hate Billy Mitchell. He's been brought up again in recent times for being a cheat, but there's no disputing the fact that originally he was the first to get a perfect score in Pac-Man, and he had accomplished so many other different things. I don't understand why he had to resort to cheating, but Billy Mitchell is Billy Mitchell, and it's just such a cool side story from a game that's just so simple and innocent as Donkey Kong. So with all these games that I've mentioned to you, what game do you think would be my game of the year? And you'd think it would be Donkey Kong, but I gotta let you guys down and say it is actually Galaga or Galaga. I just had so many good experiences with Galaga as a kid playing that game growing up in the arcades. If I gave it to Donkey Kong, I'd be doing myself an injustice. I just had so much good memories of playing Galaga in the milk bars and also at the local police boys club when going to do sports for high school and school. It just gave me so many good memories of playing that game, and I didn't quite have that same kind of experience with Donkey Kong. I found Donkey Kong to be way too hard. It was a very good and important release, and I do appreciate it for what it is, but for me, I have to give it to Galaga. Defender as well is a game that came so close, but for me it was really down to either Donkey Kong or Galaga, but Galaga gets it for me. For Game of the Year 1981 is Galaga. So that's been my look at 1981. I hope you guys liked it. These videos will get more controversial as this series goes on. I'd also like to thank all my patrons, and if you haven't already done so, now's your chance. There's a link down there for you to have a look at how to support the channel. I am trying to save up for a webcam for my podcast videos that are once a month. Also, I'd like to thank Cameron for my outro music, which you're probably hearing right now. The minute that I heard that outro draft or demo tape, as you used to call it in the 80s, the minute that I heard that first demo, I was instantly hooked. So big thank you to Cameron for the demo. I'll be putting out 1982 video in a couple of weeks time, so looking forward to putting that out for you. And as I said before, these videos are going to get way more controversial as the series goes on. My name's been Brian, I've been gaming since Spacies. Thanks guys.
Since Spacies.